Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to our webinar. I'm just going to do some brief introductions while we still got some people coming in. So I'll just get started with some, like I said, with some introductions. In this webinar, we're going to be talking about the challenges involved in getting a survey out there to your audience and the tools that we at SmartSurvey have available to make that possible. In case you're new to us, SmartSurvey is the biggest UK-based online survey software provider. We have over 275,000 users, and we supply some of the UK's biggest brands and government bodies. You can see some of them on the screen there. My name's Rich. I've been with the company for just over 5 years. My job is that I'm a product specialist, which means that I do internal training, working with the product, making surveys, finding ways to make the most of features that we've got and create solutions for ourselves and our users. We also have in the chat our moderator, Neil. He's going to be looking after things in there as we go through the webinar. Oh, I should say that this webinar is being recorded, so there will be a recording available for download probably a couple of days after we're finished. There is also going to be a handout version of this presentation that you'll be able to download from the website as well afterwards. So we'll get started with a little bit of an introduction to give you some context of what it is that we're going to be talking about. And that basically is, why do we do surveys? And the reason that we do surveys is to learn things that we didn't already know. Or sometimes it's to confirm something that we think we know, or to disprove something that we think might not be true. To do this, we need to gather data. And for that data to be useful and for us to be able to draw valuable conclusions from it, it needs to be the right blend of quality and quantity. So what does that mean in practice? We need the right people to respond to our survey. And we need enough of them to do it so that the data that we collect can support any conclusions that we end up drawing from it. In order to achieve these top two objectives, we need to make sure that our survey invitations are placed in the right place at the right time for an appropriate amount of time. It's easy for people to go to see that invitation and then go from the invitation to completing the survey. They also need to catch the attention of potential respondents. Attention is a really valuable commodity in the modern economy. There's a lot of competition for it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on as we go through it. Finally, it's worth mentioning that in this process, our methods need to be reliable, which means that can take people from the invitation to the survey with a minimal chance of them getting derailed, distracted, going to the wrong place. So this webinar is all about how we're going to meet those challenges and objectives, and it's in two main parts. These are the various tools that are available within SmartSurvey to distribute your surveys out there to potential respondents, and some tips on how to use those tools in the best and effective way. This should take around half an hour. We'll have a question and answer session at the end. If you type your questions into the Q&A section as we go along, then I'll review those at the end of the webinar and I'll give you some answers if I can. So we'll get started with the first method and kind of the most important method, which is tracking links. Whenever you create a link in SmartSurvey to a survey, we call that a tracking link. These exist as both a standalone method for getting people to your surveys, but they also form the basis for the other methods that we're going to talk about later on in this webinar. As the name suggests, it's just a link that gives access to the survey and will track some limited information about the respondent. You can make these anonymous so that you're not collecting any information about the respondent, other than obviously what you collect by directly asking people in the survey. Because they are just an HTTP link, you can place them anywhere that you like on the web, that you're able to place web content. So you can put them on your websites, into social posts, such as Facebook, Twitter, for example. You can print them onto flyers, leaflets, or receipts. There is another solution for this, which we'll talk to later on, that sometimes might be better. You can set them to close at an appropriate time that you choose, or after a certain number of responses has been reached. This is quite useful when you need to ensure a demographic balance in your responses, because you can set up different links for each demographic group and then set quotas on those links so that they remain in a representative balance for the population that you're interested in inquiring about. They can be customized with specific text if you want, and our enterprise customers can even set up custom domains for their survey, so their surveys will look entirely like they form part of their main website. And because, as I already mentioned, you can create multiple links for a particular survey, you can use them to differentiate the traffic from different sources. And you can use that information to include in your reporting or filter your responses. So this means that a single survey can collect data from multiple groups, and you can then report on that data collectively and separately by using our filtering tools. So as you can see, they're very flexible, very versatile. Email is not exactly glamorous. It's been around for a very long time, but it's still the basis of a huge amount of digital communication. Nearly everyone in the developed world has an email address. In fact, they probably have several. And in the course of doing business with people over the internet, it's almost inevitable that you're going to have collected quite a few of them yourself. Obviously, you need to be aware of data and privacy issues, but as long as you've got all of those sorted out, these can be a really valuable resource for gathering your survey data. How it works is you can upload your contacts into SmartSurvey into an address book, and use this address book to create contact lists of people that you would like to use to contact for surveys. You then, within the contact list, within our email tool, you can create and send invitations to the members of that contact list. The invitations that you can send can be plain text, they can be HTML if that's what you want. You can add extra data to the contact list, so not just like a name and an email address, but also any kind of contextual data that you may have already collected about a particular respondent, and that can be added to and reported on as part of the responses that you gather for those surveys. So this could be demographic information about a respondent, details of a purchase that they've made, or some other interaction or thing that they've done that's of relevant to the survey data that you're collecting. In addition to using that data for reporting, you can also use it for piping and filtering. This is where piping is where we set up content within the survey, and it acts a little bit like a merge field in an email. So instead of your survey saying, "Hi, respondent," it could say, "Hi, Dave, we'd like to ask you a few questions about your recent interaction with us." And in addition to that, you can also, in the same way that we talked about with the tracking links, you can set filters within the filtering tool to separate out responses based on the custom data that you've uploaded to the contact list. You can set up automated reminders that will chase down people who haven't yet responded to the email. encouraging them to complete the survey. This is done on a smart basis. You would set up a schedule ahead of time when your invitation goes out, and you might say, I want to remind people 2 weeks, 4 weeks after the original invitation goes out. And what will happen then is that when the system gets to that set date, it will look at the people that it sent the invitation to, look at the list of responses that it knows has been received for the survey, and then send an email reminding the people who haven't yet responded that there's a survey that it would be good for them to respond to. This feature does still work with anonymous surveys, which is something that people ask us about. Obviously, the data is tracked within the system of knowing who has responded to the survey, but that's never made available to if the survey is set to be anonymous, that's never made available to the survey creator. So your respondents can be confident that anonymity is being retained. So embed codes, these mean that you can place surveys directly within your web pages. This means that if you have a website, the survey is very, very easy for your site visitors to find because it's part of the website itself. It's right there in front of them. This means that you're gathering data right at the point that they're interacting with your website, with your brand, and that can help accuracy instead of relying on a memory of an interaction that took place maybe a day, a week, or a month ago. We do find that they work better for shorter surveys. So a few questions, maybe only 1 page, because in general, people are putting these into smaller windows within their website. For more lengthy or in-depth surveys that you want to happen at a similar time, we probably recommend a pop-up or an exit survey, which we'll get to. So a typical use for this might be to embed a survey into a web store so that people can rate the products that are available. You can do this with a single survey, handling feedback for multiple products by adding a custom variable to the link to identify the page or product in question. And so then you've got a survey that's not only getting feedback on all of your products, but then you can filter that down using this variable to see how people are responding to particular products. So I did just mention pop-ups and exit surveys just now. These are, as I said, ideal for gathering more detailed feedback during or after website interactions. Pop-ups appear during the website visit. Exit surveys appear afterwards. They differ from embeds in the key area in that they will open in their own window or tab rather than within the web page itself. Again, these are great pop-ups for getting people right in the moment. Exit surveys are really well suited for following up on web visits, particularly ones which end up with a user maybe leaving without a purchase or other interaction that you've been hoping that they made. A typical use for these might be to ask a respondent what they were looking for on the website, whether they found it. These are very configurable. You can set just how commonly it triggers and shows itself to respondents. For instance, you might want to only survey people who spent a certain amount of time on your site or viewed a certain number of pages. Even then, you can also set that it would only get shown to a certain percentage of those who meet that criteria. So this means that if you have a very heavily trafficked site, you can set these values so that you gather enough data to be able to draw useful conclusions, but also not interrupt or bother the majority of your website traffic. Obviously, setting those values is quite dependent on the amount of traffic you get to your website and just what it is that you're trying to find out. SMS is a really effective method of survey distribution, and we found that it does generate really good response rates. That's because of the high level of smartphone ownership that's out there now. One of the key benefits is network coverage. You can reach people in places and times that you may otherwise not be able to reach them. but we find that the absolute main benefit is the increased take-up rate, the improvement in how much your survey gets noticed. People tend to be much more likely to interact with an instant message, with an SMS, than they would be with an email. Everyone's email inbox is quite busy these days, but most phones will show an audio and an on-screen notification for an incoming SMS that it wouldn't do for an email. And this is because we tend to receive fewer SMSs each day than emails, so it doesn't get bothersome for people. The way SmartSurvey works is respondents will still need to access the internet to respond, and that's one of the reasons why we say that the extra coverage isn't the key benefit. We found that most surveys have our clients set up, they have pretty low bandwidth requirements and can be responded to with fairly basic mobile internet, but you're still getting the benefits of proper online surveys, such as detailed question types, skip logic, that sort of thing, rather than the fairly limited interaction you might get where someone sends a survey out as an SMS and asking just for a response as a number. Obviously those can be quite limiting or costly if you're sending a series of these to do a detailed survey, because you can only ever ask one question at a time. It does come with an added cost of sending the SMS, but the clients of ours that use it seem to really love it. They see a definite ROI in it, a definite return. We have a case study on our website about how IKEA use it for customer feedback. That's well worth checking out. In the handout version of this presentation, there are links in it to this that case study and some others. QR codes. I think most people are aware of these by now, but just to give a quick recap, these are two-dimensional barcodes that embed data into a simple black and white graphic, such as the one on the screen. By encoding the link URL into an image, the respondents can use their smartphone to take them straight there, and they don't have to type a link into a browser. This is really good because it means people can respond more easily, faster. There's no risk that they're going to type the link in wrong. This makes them really good for real world situations where you're reaching people out in the field. So point of sale surveys, trade shows or exhibitions, or on other printed matter like receipts, handouts, flyers, instructions, user manuals. As a technology, they've been around a long time. They were invented in the 90s. And because it's a mature technology, there's a lot of support out there in the devices people own and the apps they use. Most smartphones don't even require an app anymore. You just point the camera at the QR code and it will come up with a query asking what you want the phone to do with it. People in general know and recognize what they are. So offline surveys, and this is something we get quite a lot of interest from our clients. And the reason for this is that they give the benefits of paper surveys. You can go out and do them anywhere, regardless of access to the internet. But you also get the things that make online data collection really good, which is that you're collecting your data straight into a digitally processable format. And you don't have to have a separate data entry step with someone going in and entering data from paper forms onto a computer. That boosts productivity and it boosts reliability. The way they work is that the researcher at the start of the day, for instance, sets up the survey and they activate an option on it. They can load the survey onto their device, somewhere where it still has internet access. And at that point, go out into the world and start collecting data. Each time the survey is completed, the data collected is stored on the device. And then when the survey ends, a page will appear asking if the researcher wants to start a new response or upload the collected responses into a SmartSurvey account. This mode is ideal for research fieldwork, such as doing interviews in the street or other places where Wi-Fi might not be available. One example might be infrastructure inspectors who are filling out forms to collect data on power lines. And then when at the end of the day, they return somewhere with internet connection and upload that data back to base. This mode does assume that there's going to be someone in charge of the device doing the data entry, but there is also what we call a self-serve kiosk mode, where the survey automatically loops after each response until a researcher manually intervenes. This is a good solution for feedback or registration surveys at shows or exhibition, because sometimes Wi-Fi access there can be unreliable or expensive, or just feedback for services provided in the field, places away from Wi-Fi or 3G networks. We do have some case studies on our site about using offline surveys. The most interesting of these is about how the University of Puerto Rico used offline surveys in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria to help with their disaster relief efforts, to measure how those relief efforts were actually helping or not helping the people they were out there to help. So those are the tools, the nuts and bolts side of things. And for the last few slides, we're going to talk about how you use those to get good response rates. So how do we get more responses for our surveys? Because, you know, we all know the challenge. We can make the path to our survey as easy as possible. We think we put it in front of all the right people. But even then, we might need to put some effort into getting the responses that we want. So what makes a survey invitation effective? While invitation is often assumed to mean specifically an email invitation, really these principles hold true for anywhere that you're putting messaging out there with the intention of directing people to your survey and getting responses. So basically anything that we spoke about in the first half. The first of these is to be clear about what the survey is, who you are, and why you're doing it. You know, we are asking people to hand over data. People are getting increasingly wary of that sort of thing. So we need to be clear that we can be trusted with what they're going to give us. So related to this is making the most of the trust in your brand that you may have from your customers or respondents or clients. Using branded URLs, using a custom domain can help reassure respondents that the survey that they're being invited to complete is legitimate, trustworthy, and genuinely connected with your organization. It's good to include an estimate of the time that it's going to take to complete the survey. Even in the case of a long survey, it's something that's long and in depth. If you're upfront about this, you're going to get a much higher proportion of people seeing it all the way through to the end, instead of it being abandoned, incomplete, or having a respondent get to a point halfway through the survey and then speed run it to the end. Where you can, use personalization to make it clear that the respondent matters to you. This can be making use of the piping function in the email tool within the invitation. And finally, on this, for this slide, be clear about how responding will benefit the respondent. You know, there are some respondents out there who will be motivated just by having the chance to feedback, get some things off their chest, but it can always help to remind them that their feedback will lead to improvements in the products and the services they use, so that they will better meet their needs in the future. Basically, we're asking respondents to give up some of their time, some of that attention to complete our survey. So we need to get across that the time that they're going to invest in doing so is going to be worthwhile. Incentivization is often used to get people to respond to the surveys. By offering the chance of a prize, or in some circumstances just direct payment for completing a survey, researchers hope to encourage people to give up their time and complete the survey. At basic level, this definitely works. It does improve response rates, but we need to be aware of some of the potential drawbacks. The first and most obvious of these is obviously that people want free stuff. The better the incentive you offer, the greater the chance of getting responses from people you don't necessarily want or need to be completing your survey. This kind of behavior can be mitigated to an extent by using disqualification questions, but a smart respondent who's committed to trying to get the reward, generally they can see through these, see these coming, and take an educated guess at what they need to respond with to get the incentive. Catch questions are another way of dealing with this. These are essentially trick questions that you place in the middle of the survey, and they would ask for a specific response, such as answer this question with a 7. And these are checking that the respondent is paying attention and actually answering the questions, as opposed to just running down, clicking wildly to get to the end as soon as possible. Another occasional issue is that it can lead to a bias in the responses. Respondents might skew their answers in a way that they feel is favourable to the organisation that's running the survey, because they may feel that if their responses are not positive, they would have a lesser chance of getting a reward. This means it can be a good idea to run a small control group of unincentivized respondents alongside an incentivized survey. This is essentially so you've got a bit of a sanity check on the data that you've collected. It's definitely effective, but as long as you just need to make sure that you bear the above things in mind when you're doing it, you will generally benefit from having a larger data set. So fairly closely related to this is buying responses. This is a really good way to reach survey respondents that you might not be able to reach by other means. This is a really good solution for market researchers who are looking into new products or market sectors, somewhere where they may not have a user or customer base to draw on for data or contacts to invite to take their surveys. It's known by a couple of names depending on who's offering it. It might be called live audience, it might be called consumer panels. We tend to refer to them as consumer panels. The way it works is that there are companies out there and they will recruit and vet respondents, and they will then sell the access to them. The respondents themselves are incentivized for their time. Where this differs to direct incentivization, such as when when a researcher does it themselves, is that the company that sells access to the panels keeps an eye on the responses that are coming back, and they will weed out or remove respondents who they can see from looking at the data that they've submitted are not responding appropriately to the surveys. Because of the numbers that these companies recruit, they can offer highly targeted, highly tailored audiences for your surveys. You can drill down into demographic data, into lifestyle criteria. Costs for this vary, naturally, and as you might expect, they will go up per respondent with the greater level of targeting that you want to apply. Even if you do have a database of your own users, there can still be value in using this. You can get a new perspective, get an idea of if there are biases in your own database as to what they may prefer, what they might not prefer. Through SmartSurvey, you can use consumer panels to access over 20 million respondents based all around the world. If this is something that you're interested in using, then we have a great page on our website that'll give you a load more information about it. There'll be a link to that in the handout version of this presentation. So, to round off, a quick word on some of the notable mistakes that we see from clients when they have contacted us asking about improving their take-up rates. The first is if a distribution method isn't working, a client may get fixated on making that channel work rather than necessarily trying alternatives, looking at something else. As we've seen, you've got a wide variety of options available to you, and it can be better to take a step back and ask if the one that you're currently using is actually the best one or most appropriate one for the survey that you're trying to do. One thing we've seen a few times, clients contacting us about poor response rates to email invitations. And when we've looked at the email invitations, they've sent something that's very designed, beautiful, highly visual, but at first glance, it looks like a sales newsletter. And because it looks like a sales newsletter, it doesn't stand out from the general background noise of sales and advertising emails that we all get every day. We generally recommend taking a simple, clear approach to the email creative, make it much more obvious that, you know, this is an email asking for feedback. Make sure that the subject line is quite clear if you want to get those good response rates. And finally, sometimes you just need some patience. Some collection methods do take time. We find that an email shot can take at least a day to hit its peak response rate. And then you may still have responses coming in at a reasonable rate for another 48 or 72 hours. Physical methods may take much longer. Obviously, they're very dependent on the footfall of the places that you're placing those invitations, you know, just how many people are seeing them. And this kind of leads into just having unrealistic expectations to how many responses that you're likely to get. Even with email, which can work fast, completion rates in the high teens of percentages can sometimes be very respectable. Obviously, that doesn't count if we're talking about the internal HR surveys. Those are something else, and we would always expect something a bit better for that sort of thing. But this brings us back to a point right from the start, which is that attention is a valuable commodity, you know, to researchers, marketers, content providers, and ourselves. So that's why we need to make the use of the best possible tools, as many tools as possible, when we're sending our surveys. Right, that includes the main part. So if anybody's got any questions, I see we've had a few already dealt with in the Q&A section. Feel free to ask. So we have a question from an anonymous attendee. So we've tried posting our survey through social media, but have had little responses. Do you have any tips on how to improve uptake? Social media is obviously a very wide field. There's an enormous, great ecosystem out there, and like any social media messaging, it's always really important which social media platforms that you use. Always make sure that you're using the place where you would expect your audience to be. It's a constantly shifting landscape. It's very difficult to offer sort of catch-all advice for social media, because obviously social media encompasses everything from LinkedIn to Instagram to, I'm sure, things that teenagers are doing that I haven't heard of. So the tips would generally be anything that you would want to promote a social media post, to make a social media post of any type work better, is probably well done when applied to surveys. So images, questions, that sort of thing. But we've got lots of people coming in there. Can you recommend industry benchmarks for response rates, please? B2B response rates, please, to surveys. Again, this depends really very much on the business that you're talking about. It's a huge field, and it depends on everything from the sector that you're talking about to the level of people within an organisation that you're trying to contact. Are the numbers for SMS kept in the UK? All of the data that you upload to SmartSurvey is kept in the UK. You can use SMS to contact people outside the UK, but any data that you upload, contact lists, data that's collected by survey, that's all kept in the UK. What are good response rates for general public surveys? As I kind of said, it's almost an impossible question. It depends about what you're asking for, and you don't necessarily know until you get out there and start doing it. And then once you start doing it, you can start trying to improve it. But you know, surveys about hot topics we'll get better responses than surveys about things that people aren't necessarily interested in. And the ways that you distribute those surveys to the general public, again, has a really big effect on how the response rates for that's going to look. Do you offer paper surveys? No, we don't. We're an online survey company. That's obviously one of the advantages. You can create a survey within SmartSurvey and then print it out and fill it out as a paper survey. You can then, through our survey system, enter that as a survey response. So you can do it. It's not something that we offer natively, but you can do paper surveys with SmartSurvey. Obviously, that's not the main reason that we're here. Well, it keeps coming in. Can I preload information for offline surveys? Can I get a bit of clarification on that? What kind of information are you trying to preload? Third party, maybe a consultant. Oh, like for house-to-house address. No, I don't think so. There may be a way of doing something like that, but if you're going, yes, I'm not entirely sure that there would be a way of doing that, of sort of incrementing that each time that the survey looped. There might be a solution for doing something like that on an offline, but we would need to try and work out a way of doing it. But off the top of my head, I don't think that's possible. Well, thanks, Louise. I'm glad that you enjoyed that. Right, well, that appears to be it. So just in closing, as I said, we'll be sending out an annotated version of this deck after we've finished. That's going to have links in it to the knowledge base guides for how to use a lot of these features and some other useful bits and bobs, like I said, with the case studies. For further reading, check out the resources section of our website. There's lots of great stuff in there. That's smartsurvey.co.uk/resources. If you don't yet have a SmartSurvey account, you can try out a lot of the features that we talked about on a free trial to get an idea of how to use them for yourselves. And if you have any feedback, then let us know via email. Have a good day, everybody. Oh, yes. So yes, anonymous attendee, a video will be made available for this as well, in addition to the downloadable deck.